My name is Sienna Myers. I'm 34 years old, and I've spent 12 years getting paid to catch people lying. So when my husband's sister slid my credit card out of my purse at 3 in the morning, while I slept 20 feet above her, she picked the wrong sleeping woman. By sunrise, $9,000 was gone. Clothes, electronics, and plane tickets to Orlando for her kids. When I laid it all out in my own kitchen, my father-in-law looked me dead in the eye and said, "She'd never do something like that." And I just smiled. Because here's what none of them knew. The card she pulled from my purse wasn't the card they thought it was. It was the one card in the state of Ohio that I had no power to forgive. What happened at my father-in-law's dinner table 5 weeks later, with a $9,000 check, a pastor, and 2 pieces of paper. My family still isn't speaking about it. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light, and quiet women stop being quiet. If stories about standing your ground inside your own family speak to you, drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe. Because this one starts with a floorboard creaking in the dark. Let me back up. I'm an investigative reporter at the Dayton Herald, 12 years on the job. I've sat across from crooked contractors, a county auditor with 3 sets of books, and one pastor who robbed his own building fund. I don't rattle easy. 8 months before that night, I married Nathan Caldwell. He's 36, fixes commercial heating systems, and reads a room faster than anyone I've ever met. I used to think that was charm. I learned later it was training. You get good at reading weather when you grow up inside a storm. We bought a 2-story house on the east side of Dayton that spring. First house for both of us. I loved it the way you love a thing you built yourself, which is to say, completely and a little fiercely. My purse hung on a hook by the kitchen door, same spot every night, because I am a creature of habit and the hook was Nathan's idea. Sunday dinner at his father's house was not an invitation, it was a standing order. Frank Caldwell, 66, retired mechanic, deacon at his church, carved the roast every week like a man performing surgery on live television. 8 months in, my seat was still at the corner of the table, next to where they stacked the serving trays. I mistook the seating chart for shyness. It was a ranking. Nathan's mother had passed 4 years earlier, and her chair stayed empty, pushed in tight, like the family was still reporting to her. I wanted a real place at that table. I can admit that now. I wanted it more than I let myself know, and that want is exactly the handle they would try to use to move me. Dana came to us in September. She's Nathan's older sister, 38, divorced, 2 kids, Kyle, 12, and Tessa, 9. She'd lost her front desk job at a dental office in the spring, and by Labor Day there was an eviction notice on her apartment door. Nathan asked me on a Tuesday night, dish towel in his hands, voice pitched low like he was asking for something shameful. 6 weeks, just till she's on her feet. I said yes because of the kids. I want that on the record. Tessa still slept with a stuffed rabbit that had 1 ear. You don't send that back to a car. So Dana took the guest room downstairs, the kids took the den, and my quiet house started running like a bus station. Week 2, $60 in cash went missing from the console by the front door. Week 3, my perfume started evaporating faster than science allows. I noticed, because noticing is my whole job. And I did what a sensible woman does. I put a lock on my office door. I moved my grandmother's jewelry into the fire safe. I told Nathan, calmly, at the kitchen table. He rubbed his face and said, "Maybe you moved it and forgot." I hadn't. He knew I hadn't. But I watched something close behind his eyes, some old shutter coming down, and I decided not to push. My purse stayed on its hook by the kitchen door, because a woman has to grab her keys at 6 in the morning, and because some part of me still believed a bedroom hallway was a border no one in the family would cross. I wrote the missing cash in my notebook anyway. Habit. I document everything. I just never thought I'd need the file. The first Friday of October, I went to bed at 11. Nathan was in Columbus overnight for a job. Around 3 in the morning, a floorboard creaked in the hallway below. I surfaced halfway out of sleep, the way you do in a full house. A thin line of light slid under my door and moved away. I thought, Kyle's getting water. I thought. Kids drink water at terrible hours. I rolled over. That's the moment I've replayed the most, and I've made my peace with it, because a woman who can't sleep in her own home has already lost something bigger than money. At 6:40, my alarm went off, and my phone was already screaming. Not the alarm, the fraud alerts. They'd been lining up since 2:47 a.m., patient as churchgoers. I sat on the edge of my bed and scrolled. 2:47. 3 airline tickets. Dayton to Orlando, plus a hotel package, $4,860. 3:31. An electronics order, phone and tablet, set for store pickup, $2,300. 4:15. Children's clothing, 3 online orders stacked back to back, $1,840. I did the math twice because my hands wanted something to do. $9,000. To the dollar. 9,000. Spent while I slept in my own bed, in my own house, with my purse on its hook downstairs while somebody stood over it in the dark and made a shopping list. The house was quiet under me. Somewhere downstairs a cartoon was already playing, and a pan was heating, and a woman was humming. I sat there in the early light with my phone in my lap, and I did the thing I do at crime scenes. I got very still, and I started keeping track. I called the card's fraud line before I brushed my teeth. Locked it, disputed the charges, asked for details the way I ask sources for details. Slowly. Twice. The airline booking had passenger names: Dana Caldwell, Kyle Caldwell, Tessa Caldwell, departing in 9 days. The electronics order was under Dana's name for pickup, her cell number attached. The clothing orders shipped to my own address, which takes a special kind of confidence. And every purchase had been placed from the same internet connection. Mine. The house Wi-Fi. My house. I stood in my bathroom holding the phone, and I want to be honest about what I felt, because people imagine rage, and rage came later. What I felt first was recognition, the same cold click I feel when a spreadsheet finally confesses. Then I went downstairs. My purse hung on its hook, looking innocent. I opened it. Wallet there, cash there, cards there. But my everyday card was sitting in the wrong slot, backwards, shoved in the way you put something back in the dark when your heart is beating fast. Dana stood at my stove in my kitchen, frying eggs, humming, wearing a robe I didn't recognize with the tag still tucked in the sleeve. Kyle and Tessa were on the couch, washed in cartoon light. "Morning," Dana said, bright as a bell. "You want eggs?" I looked at this woman, my husband's sister, mother of 2 children I genuinely loved, standing in the warm smell of butter like nothing in the world had happened. I said no, thank you. What I wanted was my $9,000 back. What I wanted even more, though I couldn't have said it yet, was to be wrong. I have never once in 12 years been that kind of wrong. I waited until the kids took their cereal to the den, and then I put my phone on the counter, alerts up, and said, "Dana, we need to talk about last night." She glanced at the screen and her face did something I'll never forget. It didn't fall. It rearranged. "That's crazy," she said. "You got hacked? It's everywhere. People get hacked." I said the tickets had her name on them, her children's names. "Hackers do that," she said, flipping the eggs. "They use real names so it looks legit." There were shopping bags in the guest room with the tags still on. There was an airline confirmation, printed, folded, in the kitchen trash under the coffee grounds. I know because I looked. Because looking is what I do. Nathan got home at noon and went gray. Then he did the thing I should have seen coming. He called his father. Frank arrived within the hour, filling my doorway in his church jacket, and he sat down at my kitchen table like a judge taking the bench. He listened to me for 30 seconds. 30. I clocked it. Then he raised one hand, gentle as a crossing guard, and said the sentence that would run this family for the next 5 weeks. She'd never do something like that. Not a question about the tickets. Not a glance at his daughter. He said it the way you say a thing you have decided to make true by saying it. Dana looked at the floor with her jaw set, and I realized she wasn't afraid of being caught. She'd been caught before. She was waiting. The way you wait for a machine you trust to finish its cycle. And the machine was sitting at my table patting my hand. Frank's voice went warm next, and that scared me more than shouting. Whatever happened here, he said, family handles family. We don't need banks in this. We don't need police in this. You cancel those. What are they? Disputes? You cancel them, and I'll get to the bottom of it my own way. He said it kindly. He said it the way a man offers to carry your groceries. And around my kitchen, the weather changed. Nathan sat down. Not next to me. I noticed that with a reporter's eye and a wife's stomach, he sat at the middle of the table, equidistant, a man locating himself between two countries. He was 36 years old, and he sat like a schoolboy called to the office, shoulders straight, hands flat. I had never seen my husband sit like that. I said, as evenly as I could, that the bank was already involved, that I'd locked the card at 7 that morning, that this is simply what you do, the way you call the fire department when the curtains are burning. Frank's jaw moved. Something old crossed his face. Not guilt. I'd have recognized guilt. It looked like betrayal. Like I was the one who had reached into the family's pocket. You called them already, he said, quiet. Before you called me. And there it was. In his arithmetic, the theft was weather, but my phone call was a choice. Dana let out a breath she'd been holding since breakfast. The machine had finished its cycle, and it had found in her favor, the way it always had. What none of them understood yet, what even I only half understood, was that this particular call had never been mine to skip. Monday morning, 8:15, my desk phone rang at the Herald. It was Carol from finance, and Carol does not call to chat. Sienna, she said, we've got a fraud flag on your corporate card, 9,000 over the weekend. You need to come down. And I sat there with my coffee going cold, because that was the piece I hadn't told the family yet, the piece I'd been turning over all weekend like a stone in my pocket. I carry 2 cards from the same bank, my personal card and the Herald's corporate card. The heavy platinum one I use for records requests and travel, the one that sits in the outside slot of my wallet because I use it most. In the dark, at 3 in the morning, working fast out of a purse that wasn't hers, Dana hadn't taken my card. She'd taken the papers. Do you understand what that means? Because Frank didn't. It means the money she spent belonged to a company, and the fraud she committed was against a bank. And there is no version of this where Sienna decides to be sweet and let it go. Corporate card fraud triggers a process. Mandatory report. A signed affidavit within 10 business days of issue, swearing the use was unauthorized. And then the bank and the company decide what happens next, not the cardholder. Not the wife trying to keep Sunday dinner peaceful. I explained this to Carol's office with my badge in my hand, and then I sat in my car in the parking garage and laughed once, short and not entirely sane. My father-in-law wanted this handled inside the family, but at 3 in the morning, in the dark she chose, Dana had reached past every card I had the power to forgive, and stolen the one card that answers to nobody's family. If you've ever been told to keep the peace while somebody picked your pocket, put it in the comments. I read everyone. Because from that Monday on, keeping the peace stopped being on the menu. That night I told Nathan all of it, at our own table, with the kids' TV murmuring through the wall. The card was the Herald's. The report was filed because it had to be filed, the way a nurse charts a wound. I watched my husband take this in, and I watched him understand it about a beat and a half slower than he should have, because half his mind was already down the road at his father's house, bracing. Don't tell Dad yet, he said. Let me think. I asked him what exactly there was to think about, and I asked it gently, because I loved him, and because I could see him standing in a doorway I couldn't see. He said, You don't know what it does to him. Police. Banks. You don't know what it does. I filed that sentence away too. Meanwhile, down the hall, Dana had gone quiet in a new way. Around 9, I heard the front door, and through the window I watched her load the electronics bags into her car. And I knew where she was going. The store, 40 minutes round trip, to hand it all back like a library book, like returns run backwards through time. She came home with the bags still full. Too late. The retailer had already flagged the order for the bank that morning. Some doors close the moment you open them. She stood in my driveway a long minute under the porch light, holding a tablet box, learning that for the first time in her life. Wednesday evening, Frank came to my house. He knocked twice and then walked in, because in his mind every Caldwell door was his door, and he sat at the head of my table, without being asked. From his jacket he drew a long envelope and laid it down square, the way men of his generation present serious things. Inside was a cashier's check for $9,000, and under it, a single typed page. I read the page twice. It was a statement, addressed to whom it may concern, declaring that Dana Caldwell was an authorized user of the card in question, that the purchases were made with my knowledge, and that no crime had occurred. There was a line for my signature. He'd already paid a lawyer to draft it, which told me he'd thought this through, which was somehow the worst part. $9,000, Frank said, tapping the check. Every dime, it's over. She'll pay me back out of her own hide, that's between her and me. You sign, the bank closes it, and this family goes back to being a family. I told him the truth, plainly. The money wasn't mine to accept. The card belonged to the Dayton Herald. The victim, on paper, was a newspaper and a bank. And I couldn't authorize backwards something that was never authorized. Frank blinked at me, and I watched the sentence bounce off him like rain off a waxed hood. Then tell your company you gave her permission, he said. Simple. He honestly could not hear it. In 66 years, no truth had ever stood outside his kitchen. There had never been a fact in his life that family couldn't outvote. I slid the check back across the table and watched his hand close over it. Slow, and for one cold second I understood I hadn't refused money. I'd refused a citizenship. The next week, the machinery woke up. A fraud investigator from the bank called my cell at work. Polite, flat, thorough. A woman named Alvarez who asked questions in the exact order I would have asked them. Where is the card kept? Who had access to the residence? Had the physical card left my possession before? I answered like a witness, because I was one. Then came the email, and after it, certified mail. An affidavit of unauthorized use. 10 business days to sign and return. The Herald's counsel walked me through it in a conference room with bad coffee, and he did not soften it. If I signed the affidavit, I was swearing the use was unauthorized. True. And the bank would refer the file wherever files like that go, which at $9,000, in the state of Ohio, is a felony desk. If I signed Frank's statement instead, swearing Dana had permission, 3 things happened. The company's money became my personal liability, since lending out a corporate card breaks every policy I'd ever initialed. My name went in front of HR with the word misuse attached. And counsel looked at me over his glasses when he said this. A false statement to a federally insured bank is its own crime, with its own name, and people have gone to prison for it. So there it was, laid out in laminate and fluorescent light. My whole adult life, telling the truth had been my trade. Now it had a deadline, 10 business days. I drove home the long way that night, past the river, and I remember thinking that Frank believed he was protecting his daughter from a system. He wasn't. He was asking me to feed myself to it in her place, and he would never once see it that way. Then the family arrived by phone, in waves, like weather systems. Aunt Lorraine called first, Nathan's great-aunt, 81, sweet as pie crust. Honey, families don't do this to each other. I asked her gently whether she meant the stealing or the reporting, and she went quiet in a way that told me she'd never once put those 2 things on the same shelf. A deacon's wife from Frank's church found me on Facebook. Praying for your family in this season of confusion, she wrote, which is church for we've heard and we've picked. Cousins I'd met twice texted Nathan paragraphs. Nobody called Dana. I want you to sit with that. In 5 weeks, as far as I could ever learn, not one member of that family called the woman who actually took the card and asked her why. The calls all came to me, because in their physics I was the moving part. Dana stealing was like winter. Nobody's fault, endure it together. Me reporting it was a decision, and decisions have owners. The cruelest one was quiet. Frank, at Sunday dinner, because yes, we still went. Nathan white-knuckled the whole drive, stood to carve and said grace, and added, at the end, eyes closed, "Lord, we know Margaret is watching over this family. She always knew how to keep us together." Margaret, Nathan's mother, 4 years gone. He never said my name and he never said Dana's. He just laid that good woman's memory on the table like a fourth piece of paper for me to sign. I sat in my corner seat by the serving trays and I recognized the play, because I've covered politicians. When the facts are against you, don't argue the facts. Change the question to loyalty. Everyone at that table passed the potatoes and looked at me like I was the one holding the knife. I did what I do when the ground moves. I went to the records. Not to build a case. The bank was building the case fine without me. But because I needed to know what I'd married into, and public records don't change their story depending on who's at the table. It took 2 lunch hours. Dana Caldwell, 2 prior evictions, in 2019 and 2022, both dismissed after payment in full. Payer of record on the second one, Franklin R. Caldwell. 3 small claims judgments, all settled, all quiet. And one I had to work for. A police report from her old dental office, 6 years back, a cash drawer short by hundreds, restitution made, charges never filed at the employer's request. I sat with my notebook in the Herald's morgue, surrounded by 100 years of other people's worst days, and the picture assembled itself the way pictures do. There was no one desperate midnight in my kitchen. There was a system, old and well-oiled, and it had been running since before I ever met this family. Dana falls, Frank catches, the paperwork disappears, and everyone calls it love. My $9,000 wasn't a crisis. It was a subscription renewal. That same night at home, Nathan went up to the attic to dig out a suitcase for a work trip, and he was gone too long. I climbed up and found him kneeling under the bare bulb, in front of an old carton with his own name markered on the side in a boy's handwriting, Marcus's. No. It said Nathan. Keep out, in fat childhood letters gone brown. He wasn't opening it. He was just looking at it, with an expression I'd never seen on my grown husband's face. Then he shut the flaps, said old junk, and carried the suitcase down past me. I didn't push. I wrote the box in my notebook. The affidavit arrived on a Thursday, certified, in an envelope so official it practically cleared its throat. 10 business days from that stamp. I read it once at the counter. 1 page, plain language. I did not authorize. I did not consent. I understand this statement may be used in criminal proceedings. A line for my signature, a line for the date. And then I did something I still think about. I folded it in 3 and put it in my purse. The same purse, on the same hook, by the same kitchen door. And that's where it lived from then on. My own little unexploded thing, hanging by the coats. I'd touch the outline of it through the leather every morning like a bruise you keep checking. That same night, Nathan finally told me about the $40. We were in bed, lights off, his voice coming out of the dark the way confessions do. In 1971, his grandfather, Frank's father, wrote a bad check for $40 at a hardware store in Xenia, 12th of the month, a Tuesday. The store pressed it. The county was making an example that year, and 2 deputies came to the house at breakfast and took him out the front door in handcuffs with his coffee still steaming on the table. Frank was 11. He stood on the porch in his socks and watched the neighbors watch. The family lost the house within a year. His mother cleaned 3 buildings a night for a decade. The marriage didn't survive it, and the man who came back from county wasn't the man who left. Dad's told it exactly once that I know of, Nathan said. At Mom's funeral, of all places. He stood by the casket and said, "Nobody I love will ever owe the law again." I lay there in the dark doing reporter math. 55 years, 1 bad check, and every crooked thing this family ever swallowed since. All of it interest on $40. 2 nights later I couldn't sleep, and at 2 in the morning I found Dana at my kitchen table with a mug of tea she hadn't made from her own groceries. We looked at each other in the stove light, 2 women in one kitchen at the exact hour she'd chosen for her shopping trip, and she must have decided the hour made us intimate, because she talked. "I was going to pay it back," she said. You know that, right? Before anybody even noticed. That was the plan. I asked her how, on no job, and she waved the question away like a fly. Then she leaned in and gave me the closest thing to honesty I ever got from her. You have everything, Sienna. You get that, right? The house. Nathan. A job where they print your name. My kids have never been on a plane. Never. Tessa asks about the ocean like it's a cartoon place. It was for them. Her eyes were wet and her chin was up, and I realized I was watching a woman read her own defense aloud and find it airtight. She didn't believe she'd stolen anything. In her arithmetic, there was a great big family account somewhere, and she was simply overdrawn against it, the way she'd been overdrawn her whole life, and someone would top it up, because someone always had. My purse had just been the nearest branch office. The kids keep asking if we're still going, she said. And there it was. The return policy on her apology. Even now the trip was alive in her head. I told her the truth. The tickets were flagged funds, nobody was flying anywhere on that money. She looked at me the way you look at a broken vending machine. Then she rinsed her mug, said goodnight, and went to bed. Not once, in all of it, had she said the word sorry. The deadline got inside my marriage on a Tuesday. Nathan came home from a bid that went sideways, poured himself a drink he didn't finish, and said, without looking at me, "Can't you just sign it? Dad's paper. It's only paper." And I want to be fair to him, because I love him, and because he is also a casualty in this story. He said it the way a tired man says it, not a cruel one. But something in me went very quiet and very young. Here is what I've never told anyone in that family. When I was 16, my mother sat on the edge of my bed crying, holding a shut-off notice, and I walked to my closet and took down the envelope where I kept my college money. 3 years of babysitting and register shifts. I handed it over and she kissed my forehead and said, "You're such a good girl. You never make it worse." I want you to hear that sentence the way I finally heard it. Not you matter. Not I'll fix this. You never make it worse. That was the wage. That was the whole wage. And 2 years later the lights got shut off anyway, and the envelope stayed empty. And I left for school on loans I finished paying at 31. So when my husband said it's only paper, I heard my mother's mattress creak. I said, "I've signed that paper before, Nathan. It doesn't buy love, it rents silence. And the rent always comes due again." He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see 2 trainings fighting in him, his and mine. Have you ever been the one who never makes it worse? The one who pays so nobody has to talk about it? Tell me in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one. And hold on, because what my father-in-law did next, I truly did not see coming. It reached my newsroom on a Thursday. Frank golfs, badly, socially. And one of his foursomes sits on the Herald's business side, and I will never prove the phone call happened, which is exactly how calls like that are designed. What I can prove is the sequence. Thursday, Frank's golf partner had lunch with our publisher. Thursday afternoon, a rumor moved through my newsroom with its collar up. Sienna let a family member use the company card, and now she's crying fraud to cover it. By Friday, HR had opened what they called a routine review, and 2 reporters I'd trained stopped meeting my eyes at the coffee machine. Understand what was happening, because I didn't, at first. I kept waiting for the facts to defend me, the way they do in print. But a newsroom runs on reputation the way a family runs on loyalty, and someone had figured out that my reputation was a load-bearing wall. You don't have to convict a reporter of lying, you just have to make her file look complicated. Ruth Okafor pulled me into her office, my editor, 61, 35 years in, a woman who once stared down a senator's lawyer until he apologized to the intern. She shut the door. "Somebody is writing your story before you can file it," she said. "You taught me to notice that, so notice it." I told her all of it, the card, the affidavit, the check, the lawyer-drafted statement waiting for my signature like a trapdoor. Ruth listened the way she edits, no face at all. And then she said just one thing. "They're not trying to beat your facts, Sienna. They're trying to spend your credibility until the truth can't afford you." I wrote that down. I write everything down. It was the first sentence in weeks that made the whole board visible. And then came the weekend that nearly finished me. The tickets, it turned out, were the one purchase the bank couldn't claw back cleanly, non-refundable fare, already ticketed, and Frank announced that letting them expire would be throwing good money after bad. So he paid the change fees out of pocket, called it salvage, and on Saturday morning Dana flew her children to Orlando on the seats she'd bought with my stolen $9,000. By Sunday the family group chat, which no one had thought to remove me from, filled with photographs. Dana in sunglasses at the gates of the Magic Kingdom, an arm around each kid, Tessa mid-laugh under a castle made of sky. The caption said, "Blessed." I sat on my stairs and looked at that word for a long time. I want to be careful here, because Tessa's face in that picture was the happiest I'd ever seen it, and none of it, was those children's fault. That's the part people miss about families like this. The system launders everything through the kids. Every theft becomes a memory you'd be a monster to begrudge. Sunday dinner that night was roast chicken and performance. Frank stood, raised his glass, and gave a toast I can still recite. "To family," he said. "The world out there will cheat you, sue you, sell you out for $1. In this house, we do not do that to each other." He looked at me the whole time, warm as a heat lamp, and then he set down his glass and added softly, like scripture, "She'd never do something like that." And around the table, they nodded. All of them, nodding with the Orlando photos still glowing in their pockets. That was the moment I finally understood the game. This was never a dispute about facts. Everyone at that table knew exactly what Dana did. It was a referendum on whether I belonged, and the ballots were already in. Monday, the Herald's counsel called me back into the conference room, and this time, Ruth came too. He put both futures on the table like a man dealing two cards face up. Path 1. I sign the affidavit. True statement, unauthorized use. The bank refers the file to the Montgomery County prosecutor, and at $9,000, Dana would be looking at a felony charge. First offense, single mother, likely a diversion program if her lawyer had a pulse, but a charge, with her name on a docket, which in the Caldwell family was the one unforgivable weather event. Path 2. I sign Frank's notarized statement. The fraud case evaporates. And in its place, mine begins. Policy violation, personal liability for $9,000 corporate dollars, an HR file that ends my career at the Herald and probably in this business, because a reporter who lends out access is a reporter no editor can defend. And I'd remind you, counsel said, dry as toast, that swearing a false authorization to the bank is itself a federal offense. So the honest summary is, one of these papers puts your sister-in-law in front of a judge, and the other one could put you there. Ruth hadn't said a word through any of it. She walked me out through the newsroom, past the desks, and at the elevator she finally spoke. Deadline's a week from Monday. Whatever you're going to be it on purpose. The doors closed on her face, and I stood there holding my badge, understanding at last that there was no third paper coming. There was never going to be a version where everyone stayed whole. Somebody at that dinner table was going to lose the rest of their life as they knew it. The only question left was whether it would be the person who did it, or me. That night, Nathan brought the box down from the attic on his own. He set it on the kitchen table, folded back the flaps with those careful mechanic's hands, and started laying out his childhood like evidence. A paper route ledger from when he was 13, graph paper, a boy's block printing, weeks of columns, saved, $211 at the bottom, underlined twice, and then, across the whole page, in an adult's handwriting, one cancelled line, borrowed for Dana's braces, will repay. He never did, Nathan said. I checked that ledger every month for a year, then I stopped checking. Under the ledger, a photograph of a kid with a guitar, Nathan at 15, all elbows, holding a pawn shop fender like it was a newborn. Sold the next summer, he told me, to cover Dana's car damage after she clipped a parked truck at 18. Frank drove Nathan to the pawn shop himself and called it a loan too. Under the photograph, a savings bond from his grandmother, cashed early. Signature not his. Item after item, 20 years of small quiet confiscations, every one of them wearing the same word, borrowed. My husband stood over that table for a long time. Then he said the thing I'd been waiting 8 months to hear him figure out. I thought this was what being a big brother was, being the one who could afford it. But look at it all in one place, Sienna. I wasn't generous. I was trained. He looked up at me, and his eyes were terrible and clear. And Dad wasn't protecting her. He was practicing on me. He didn't tell me to sign anything that night. He put his hand flat on the ledger, like a man taking an oath on it, and he left it there a while. Frank's next move was a masterpiece, and I say that with a reporter's respect for craft. Wednesday, he walked into the Herald's lobby, my building, in his church jacket, and handed the front desk an envelope for the publisher's office. Inside, a new cashier's check for $9,000 and a cover note in his own hand. For the full amount in question. Our family resolves its own matters. I trust this closes the account. He didn't ask for me. He made sure he didn't ask for me. That was the art of it. By the time I heard, half the building had the story, and the story was this. A sweet old retired deacon had hobbled in to pay his family's debt, and Sienna Myers was still, for some reason, insisting on paperwork. He'd reframed the entire thing in one gesture. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a difficult woman refusing a good man's apology. The check sat in the publisher's office like a hostage, because of course the Herald couldn't touch it. Accepting private restitution to bury a fraud referral is the kind of thing that ends up in other newspapers, but its existence did its work. And stapled to the note was an invitation, cream cardstock, actual calligraphy. Sunday dinner. The whole family. Pastor Bill will join us. Let's resolve this as a family should. Ruth read it over my shoulder and made a sound I'd never heard from her, half laugh, half growl. He's picked the venue, the witnesses, and the referee, she said. That's not dinner, that's a hearing. Then she looked at me. Don't play the part he wrote for you. He's expecting the reporter. Bring the wife. Bring somebody he's never met. Thursday evening, Frank called me. Not Nathan. Me. And his voice was the warmest I'd ever heard it, which is how I knew to sit down. Sienna. Daughter. First time he'd ever used the word, and he spent it like a chip. I want Sunday to go well. I truly do. But you should know what happens if this paper of yours goes to a courthouse. Here it comes, I thought. The threat. But Frank was better than that. He didn't threaten. He forecast. Memories are funny things, he said gently. Lorraine remembers you handing Dana your card at Easter. Nathan's cousin remembers you saying Dana could borrow it for the kids anytime. Under oath, people remember what their family needs them to remember. That's not lying, sweetheart. That's love. And the floor tilted, because there was one grain of sand in it that was true, and he knew it. Back in the spring, before any of this, I'd once handed Dana my personal card at a gas station. Her tank empty, her wallet upstairs. $38. Once. My card, not the Herald's. But put that fact in front of a jury, wrapped in 6 loving witnesses, and watch the word unauthorized start to sweat. You're a smart girl, Frank said. You know a family's word outweighs a stranger's paperwork. It always has. He wasn't wrong, and that's what made it obscene. He'd found the one thing my records couldn't beat. A congregation. I'm not threatening you, honey, he said, soft as a hymn. I'm just telling you the weather. And he hung up, and I stood in my kitchen listening to the dial tone, understanding that I'd just heard the whole system say its own name out loud. That night was the bottom. Nathan was asleep. The house was dark. I sat at my kitchen table at 1 a.m. and took the affidavit out of my purse and unfolded it next to my late father's fountain pen, the one thing of his I own. And I am going to tell you the truth. I was going to sign the other paper. Frank's paper. I'd decided. I sat there building the case for it, and it was a beautiful case. Sign, and my marriage gets easier. Sign, and Sunday dinner stays warm. Sign, and Tessa keeps a mother at home. All it cost was one signature and a version of events, And hadn't I been trained for exactly that trade since I was 16 years old, in a bedroom with a shut-off notice? I could hear my mother plain as anything. "You're such a good girl, you never make it worse." My whole life folded into one sentence, and I sat there aching to earn it again, and my hand actually moved toward the pen. And a floorboard creaked behind me. Tessa. 9 years old, one-eared rabbit under her arm, squinting in the stove light. She looked at the papers, then at me, with that terrible radar children have, and she said, "Is Mom in trouble because of us?" And I heard myself answer, instant, certain, the way you answer a child. "No, sweetheart. Grown-ups are in trouble because of grown-ups." I got her a glass of water. I walked her back to bed. And then I stood alone in my hallway, hearing my own voice hang in the air because I had just told that little girl, in one sentence, the exact truth I'd spent 30 years refusing to tell myself. Friday, I told Ruth I didn't know if I could put a mother of two in front of a judge. She took off her glasses, which in 35 years of newsroom legend meant either a Pulitzer or a firing, and she said, "Let me tell you what you taught me, back when you were 25 and insufferable. You said the story doesn't need us to save it, it needs us to not lie about it. You've never once killed a true story because the source's family cried in the lobby. People have cried in that lobby, Sienna. Real people. Over real stories. And you printed them, because that's the covenant. So explain to me why your own story is the one that's for sale." I started to answer and she talked over me, which she never does. And here's the practical end of it. Alvarez called our counsel yesterday as a courtesy. The bank has the device records. The booking came off Dana's own phone, her Apple ID, her saved traveler profile, her seat preferences, for God's sake. They have the store pickup on camera. This train left the station the night she went shopping. You're not the engine, and you were never the brakes. The only thing you decide, the only thing that was ever yours to decide, is whether the record shows you told the truth or swore to a lie. She put her glasses back on. Business concluded. The truth doesn't need you to protect it, Sienna. It needs you to stop negotiating with people who are scared of it. I walked back to my desk through the newsroom I'd given 12 years to, and for the first time since 2:47 a.m. on that Saturday, I knew exactly who I was. Sunday came gray and quiet. I dressed the way I dress for a deposition, the good blazer, the flat shoes you can stand in. Nathan watched me from the doorway of our bedroom and he asked, "What are you going to do?" And I told him the only honest answer I had. I'm going to tell the truth one time, out loud, in the room where all the lying gets done. What happens after that is up to everybody else. He nodded slowly. He didn't ask which paper was in my purse, and I loved him for that, because the answer was both. The affidavit, unsigned, folded in 3, my father's pen, and Frank's statement too. I'd kept it, because you don't walk into a hearing without knowing exactly what the other side wants you to sign. I stood in my kitchen a minute before we left, in front of the hook by the door, and I thought about a purse hanging there at 3 in the morning, and a woman moving through my dark house with a shopping list. 5 weeks. It had been 5 weeks. And in that time I'd lost my sister-in-law, most of a family, half my newsroom's trust, and every illusion I had about what my marriage was resting on. The one thing nobody had managed to take was sitting folded in my purse with a dead man's pen, and it weighed nothing at all. In the car, Nathan reached over and held my hand at every red light, letting go to shift, finding it again. Neither of us said a word the whole way there. There was nothing left to say before the saying. Frank's dining room was staged like a holiday card. 14 of us, the extended set, Lorraine, the cousins, the deacon's wife who'd prayed at me on Facebook, and Pastor Bill, seated at Frank's right hand like a character witness. The roast chicken steamed. The good china was out. Margaret's china. The set that only surfaced for Easter and funerals. And I noted that, because everything in that room was a sentence if you knew how to read it. And then there was my seat. Not the corner. Not by the serving trays. My place cards at a family dinner, sat directly to Frank's left. Promoted. 8 months I'd wanted up that table, and the week he needed my signature, up I came. Beside my water glass, arranged neat as a place setting, the envelope with the cashier's check, and the typed statement, with 3 little yellow tabs along the margin reading, "Sign here." Pastor Bill said grace, long and specific, about forgiveness, about the folly of letting the world's institutions into the temple of the family, and everyone hummed amen, and I watched Dana across the table studying her plate like a map. Frank stood to carve. He was magnificent, I'll give him that. Silver-haired, steady-handed, backlit by the sideboard lamp like a portrait of himself. "Before we eat," he said, "I want to say something." He said the world out there would cheat you and sell you for $1. He said, in this house, we do not do that to each other. He said family is the only court that matters, and its verdicts are mercy. Always mercy. And then he laid the carving knife down, looked around the table at his assembled congregation, and delivered the line one last time, soft and final, like a gavel wrapped in flannel. She'd never do something like that. Every head at that table turned to me. 13 faces, waiting to watch me sign. Pastor Bill was already holding out his own pen. I looked at Frank's tabs, yellow as caution signs, and I opened my purse. "Sienna." Frank turned to me, and his whole weathered face opened up like a porch door. "Daughter." Second time in his life he'd used the word, and this time he spent it in front of witnesses. "I know these weeks have been hard on you, on everyone. And I know." He chuckled, warm, and the table chuckled with him. "You're a woman of documents. So we did it your way. Had a lawyer draw it up and everything." Soft laughter. "You sign that, and here's what happens. The check is yours, every dime, today. Whatever your company needs squared, we square it. Dana's going to pay me back if it takes her 10 years, and that's her burden, between her and me and the Lord." He paused, and then he brought out the real offer, the one he'd been saving, and his voice dropped so the whole table had to lean toward him. "And you won't be Nathan's wife who works at the paper anymore. You'll be my daughter. Full stop. This table, these people, every Sunday God sends, yours. That's what family means. It means the book closes." The silence after that was total. Even the chicken seemed to be listening. Dana's eyes came up from her plate, and for one strange second we looked straight at each other, and I swear what I saw in her face wasn't triumph. It was something closer to pity. The pity of a lifer watching a new inmate get offered the same deal she took at 19. Nathan's hand found my knee under the table, not pressing either direction, just there. Everything I had wanted for 8 months was being handed to me across Margaret's china, wrapped and ribboned, and all it cost was my name at the bottom of a lie. I reached into my purse. The table exhaled, and what I brought out was not Pastor Bill's pen, and it was not Frank's paper. It was mine. I unfolded the affidavit and smoothed it flat on Margaret's tablecloth, and I took out my father's fountain pen, and I heard my own voice come out level, the way it does on camera, because some trainings hold. "Before anyone eats, I'm going to say some true things one time. Nobody has to say anything back. Frank, you especially. I'd rather you just listened." He was still standing, carving knife beside the platter, and something in my tone sat him down. "In 1971, 2 deputies took your father off his own porch over a $40 check, and nobody in that county ever asked whether he had a good reason, and your family never got back up. You were 11. I'm not going to pretend I know what that morning cost, because I don't." His face went to stone, but I watched the words land. "You've spent 50 years making sure nobody you love ever pays for anything, ever again. And Frank, look at what it bought. Your son ran a paper route at 13 and saved $211, and you took it for Dana's braces and wrote borrowed in his ledger, and he checked that ledger every month for a year. He's 36, and he still can't sit at this table without asking your permission with his shoulders. Your daughter is 38, and she has never once in her whole life been allowed to find out she could survive a consequence. You took every single one before it could teach her anything. A cash drawer, 2 evictions. And 5 weeks ago she walked through my dark house at 3 in the morning and took $9,000 from my purse. And Frank, Here is the part that should keep you up at night. She wasn't even scared. They took your father for $40, and you've been paying it back ever since. With Nathan's ledger, with her courtrooms, and now with me. That's not protection. That's a debt with everyone's name on it, but hers. I looked around the table then, at Lorraine, at the cousins, at the pastor with his borrowed pen. I can't sign your paper. I want this family. God knows I wanted it more than any of you ever noticed, but the card Dana took wasn't mine. It belongs to my newspaper, and the truth about it was never mine to trade, not for a check, and not even for a seat at this table. The truth doesn't need my permission. And in front of 13 witnesses, on Margaret Caldwell's good tablecloth, I signed my name to the affidavit with my dead father's pen and dated it, and slid the cashier's check back to Frank. The sound the table made was not a gasp. It was quieter than that, and worse. The sound of a room full of people all deciding something at once. Frank rose. His hands, steady on a carving knife all evening, had started to shake. "Then you're not family," he said, and his voice broke in the middle of it, the first crack I'd ever heard in that man. "You were never family." Dana stood without a word and gathered her children toward the door. Chairs scraped. Somebody's fork rang against china, and I folded my paper, capped my father's pen, and walked the length of that dining room alone, past the sideboard, past Margaret's empty chair. 5 steps that took 5 weeks, or maybe 30 years. Behind me, in all that silence, I heard one more chair slide back, and my husband said, to no one and to everyone, "I'll get her coat." It was raining, the small kind of rain that doesn't ask anything of you. Nathan drove. Neither of us touched the radio. We were most of the way home, stopped at the light on Wayne Avenue, wipers keeping slow time, when he finally spoke, eyes still on the road. 36 years, he said. Everybody in that house has been telling me who I am since I could walk. Dad, Dana, even Mom, God rest her, in her way. The light turned green. He didn't move. You were the first person who didn't ask me to pretend. Somebody behind us tapped their horn, polite, Ohio style, and he raised a hand in the mirror and drove on, and I broke. Not the way I'd braced for. No sobbing, nothing cinematic. Just water coming down my face like the rain outside, quiet and past due, 5 weeks of it, or maybe 30 years of that too. Because here's what I understood at that traffic light. I hadn't lost a family back there in that dining room. You can't lose something that was never offered to you. Only rented, at a price that reset every Sunday. What I'd actually done was set down a debt I'd been carrying since I was 16 years old, one I'd co-signed in a bedroom with a shut-off notice, and my arms didn't know how to feel this light. Nathan reached over at the next red light and held my hand. He didn't let go to shift until it turned. Here's how it all settled, because you've earned the accounting. Dana took the kids to Frank's that same night, and a cousin came for her boxes the following week. The bank referred the file, and the Montgomery County prosecutor offered Dana pretrial diversion. She admitted responsibility in writing, entered a repayment plan for the full $9,000, drew 100 hours of community service, and if she completes all of it, no conviction goes on her record. First offense, 2 kids, a judge with sense. I have no complaints. I never wanted her in a cell. I wanted her in a world with edges, and for the first time in 38 years, she's living in one. She found work at a distribution warehouse that fall, and this is the part I'd frame if I could. She's kept it. 5 months and counting, longer than she's held on to anything in years, Nathan says. In March, she came by our house alone, stood on the porch she'd once lived behind, and handed me an envelope. Her first restitution installment had cleared, and separate from it, folded in notebook paper, was a personal check made out to me, drawn on her own account, from her own wages. It wasn't large. It didn't need to be. "Don't tell Dad," she said, and left, and I stood on my porch understanding that I'd just watched a 40-year-old chain lose its first link. The Herald got made whole by the bank, HR closed its review, no violation found, with a letter in my file saying so. And Ruth framed the letter and hung it in the break room, Because Ruth is Ruth. Frank has not changed. He will not change. The Sunday dinners go on without us. And the family story, as it reaches me through cousins, is that the reporter tore the family apart over money. He sent our Christmas card back unopened. That's the truth about breaking a system. The system doesn't thank you. And mostly, it doesn't even break. It just loses its reach into your particular house. Nathan started therapy that winter, Tuesday evenings. He keeps the paper route ledger on his desk now, next to his keys, and when I asked him why, he said, "So I remember the sticker price of quiet. Kyle and Tessa still come over, Dana lets them, which tells you something she'll never say out loud. And my purse hangs where it always hung, on the hook by the kitchen door, unlocked, unguarded, in a house where I sleep the whole night through. Some nights I look at it on my way up to bed. Just a purse, on a hook, in a quiet kitchen. You'd never know it once held the most expensive piece of paper in Ohio." I used to believe love meant paying quietly so nobody had to leave the table, but I know better now. Protection that costs the truth isn't protection. It's just a bill the family keeps forwarding to whoever loves them most. And the kindest thing I ever did for the Caldwells was finally, gently, marking that bill return to sender. That's my story. One card, 2 pieces of paper, and a signature that cost me a family, and gave me back my own. If this reminded you of a table where your truth has no chair, maybe it's time to pull one up. Share this video with someone who's been paying quietly for years. Drop a comment telling me what you would have signed, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.